Hello, welcome to Talk Truth. My name is Corey Huntsberger. I've got my father, Alan Huntsberger, in the studio. Dad, we're going to start off with our foundational verse. The earth and everything in it, the world and its inhabitants, belong to the Lord, for he laid its foundation on the seas and established it on the rivers. Psalm 24, 1 and 2. Important verse. We say it every single day. Hopefully it's starting to sink into the subconscious mind of those that are watching this show. Because the more you focus on that verse and you let it take over your day-to-day thoughts and how you filter things, it's quite powerful, right, Dad?
Well, we got a letter from a viewer saying that she wants T-shirts that have that verse on it. So
T-shirts. It's going to happen, everybody. It's going to happen. And bumper stickers.
And bumper stickers, absolutely.
Well, I'm excited about our guest. He hasn't been on for a while. I think it's because he's been traveling. He's been on the circuit, speaking all over the place. So maybe you guys have seen him more than we have. We've got Michael Wagner back on the show. Michael, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be back with you guys.
Now, you've been traveling, huh? Going on a circuit?
Yeah.
What have you been saying on the circuit?
Well, like for the most part, I've been traveling because of the outcome of the federal election. Because of that outcome, there's been a lot of people talking about the possibility of Alberta independence. And so I've been invited by groups who are interested in that idea to come and speak to them. So I mostly speak to them about the history of Alberta's treatment within Canada and how, especially since the time of Pierre Trudeau, Alberta has suffered from various policies of the federal government. And because we've tried to fix Canada, like various Albertans through the Senate reform movement, and through the Reform Party of Canada, various Westerners and Albertans have tried to make changes within Canada so to accommodate Alberta and the West so our voice could be heard in the national government. And because they were not successful, it seems to me that the only remaining alternative is for Alberta to move towards independence. So that's kind of a summary of the message that I've been giving.
Childhood dream for you, right?
Yeah, well, I did get involved when I was a teenager, like in the time of the Pierre Trudeau, when he brought in the National Energy Program. That's when I first got involved in this movement. And, I didn't stay consistently involved throughout my whole life, but I was interested in right from that early period. And so in that sense, it is a childhood dream, yes.
You know what I like about it is that I think Albertans are actually looking and saying, what do I want in a country that I live in? What do I want, right? And what means the most to me? And I think all of us want freedom and we want truth, but we want more than that. We want prosperity. We want to be able to see our children and our grandchildren be able to buy their own homes and have their own land and actually own their land. And, even see the possibility that our taxes could either be, really lowered or completely eliminated. I mean, it goes on and on. And so those of us that have looked at this for a long, long time, Michael, are getting more and more excited. And, I know that some people are fearful, but, how many decades have we gone through as Albertans saying, can we be a part of Canada, please? Can we be a part of Canada? And it's like, no, well, we'll vote for our senator. Well, we're not going to pick up where, it goes on and on and on and on. And finally, it's like Dr. Moudry's article, enough is enough. We've tried to get in. You guys don't want us in. Fine. We can do it ourselves and we'll be better off.
We're not going to sit at the kids' table anymore. We want to sit with the adults.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, well, like Alan, it's very much like you said, we're talking about what's the best for our children and our grandchildren, because so many of the people who are attending these meetings, are people who are people. I mean, I'm getting old too. Like a lot of us are getting on in age, and we won't be, if Alberta becomes independent in the next few years, like we don't have a lot of runway left in our lives, but it's for our children and our grandchildren, because the recent Liberal government for the last few years have been driving Canada down, down, down. And a lot of people see, Alberta becoming independent is like a different future where we don't have to go down, down, down with the rest of the country. We can have something different, like you said, something with prosperity, where our children and grandchildren can buy their own homes. We can have a prosperity that the rest of Canada isn't going to have because of the kind of governments that they have been electing in central Canada in particular.
Well, to me, it's much more reasonable to run something that is closer to you than thousands of miles away. I mean, thousands of miles away for those people to be in charge of our destiny. You know, do they care? Do they? No, they don't. Who cares the most about what Alberta is going to be like is those of us who live in Alberta. And yeah, I like to talk about that. But anyway, let's talk about what you wrote an article about, which I thought was interesting because you were really addressing it to Christians, right?
That's right. Like the article was called "No Separation of Christians and Politics," and it's an article about the issue of separation of church and state. Because whenever Christians get involved in politics, some people complain that there's a violation of the separation of church and state, and so I thought that really had to be explained properly so people can understand. And the summary point is, when Christians get involved in politics, that is not a violation of the separation of church and state. And I make a couple of distinctions that are very important. One is the issue of separation of church and state. That's one issue. The other issue is the separation of religion and politics, which is a completely different idea. So the separation of church and state is a really good idea. I mean, it's something we have to have because the state is a separate institution and the church is a separate institution, and they don't get involved in each other's affairs. And even, as far back as the Old Testament, you could see that the king had his role and jurisdiction, and the high priest had his role and jurisdiction, and they did not impinge on the other's jurisdiction. They stayed separate, and so there's actually a time in Chronicles where King Uzziah goes into the temple to offer incense, and the priests confront him and throw him out because that's not his jurisdiction. He has no right to go in there and do that. That is a separate jurisdiction, not his jurisdiction as the king. And so we have this idea all the way back from the Old Testament and right, throughout the New Testament, so on. Like with Romans 13, there's a civil government is instituted by God with a particular role in mind, a completely different role than the church. So the church and the state biblically are separate institutions with their own jurisdictions, their own roles, and they don't get involved in each other's business because they are separate. But there's a different concept, and that is religion and politics. Religion and politics are general concepts. Like politics has to do with matters related to the government and governing and policy and things like that. And religion basically refers to our fundamental beliefs. Like all of us as individuals, we all have fundamental beliefs. Like many people don't want to call it a religion. They want to say, well, I'm secular, but their secular views are also kind of function as a religion in their lives. It's their most fundamental beliefs that they live their lives according to those beliefs. So like this is a particular definition of religion, but I think it's the right definition of religion. The religion really refers to our fundamental beliefs. And every person who gets involved in politics brings their fundamental beliefs into their politics. Then that's what Christians do. So when Christians, evangelical Christians and conservative Christians otherwise, get involved in politics, we bring our fundamental beliefs in, and that is what we believe should be guiding government policy, because that's what we really believe. But the other side, the secularists or progressives, they are also bringing their fundamental beliefs into politics, and they want the government to govern according to their beliefs and what they think is right. So when Christians get involved in politics, we're doing nothing different from anything else that anybody else is doing. And so that phrase, the separation of church and state, I think, has been misused to try and get Christians not to participate in politics, like to discourage Christians from getting involved. When other people bring their fundamental beliefs in, that's okay. But when Christians bring their fundamental beliefs into politics, they're accused of violating the separation of church and state. And they're not. They're just acting as citizens just like everybody else. And so I've been encouraging Christians, you are a full citizen. You have every right to participate in politics just as much as anybody else, and you have just as much right to bring your Christian beliefs into politics as a secularist has to bring secular views into politics, or a progressive has to bring progressive views into politics. We're equal citizens, and we get to bring our beliefs in, and that does not violate the separation of church and state. And as I mentioned earlier, the separation of church and state is an institutional separation that is a good thing that we as Christians endorse, and we want that. But we don't separate religion and politics, because nobody separates their religion from their politics. Every person brings their fundamental beliefs into politics. And so when Christians do that, we're just doing what everybody else is doing. So I wanted to make that clear to people, because I want to encourage Christians. They can get involved, and there's nothing wrong with them being involved. And when people bring this up, separation of church and state, it's a discouragement to Christians, but it should not be. If you properly understand the issue, We're not doing anything wrong when we get involved in politics. So that's kind of a brief summary of what I put in the article.
You know, they both run together, and you brought up Romans 13, but it runs together, government, and Christianity, because their government is the servant of God. They're God's servants, right? To make sure that righteousness happens and evil doesn't. And if evil happens, then there's punishment. If righteousness happens, then, that's good. You don't have to live in fear. So to me, Romans brings those both together in exactly what you say.
Yeah, no, I think that's an important point, because when we look at Romans 13, it says the civil magistrate is a minister of God, and he's supposed to punish the evildoer and reward the person who does good. Now, how does he know what's good and what's evil? Well, if it's God who's instituting him as civil magistrate, obviously it'll be God's word, which provides the standard for him as to determine what's good and evil. It can't be something other than God's word if God has established him as his minister. So if a civil magistrate is fulfilling his office as a minister of God, he's getting his guidance on his policies from the Bible, because God established him in that office. And if he doesn't, then he's not serving God as a minister as God has put him in place to do. So he's violating his authority as a civil magistrate if he's not following God's rules as to what's good and to what's bad. So, I think you're right there. And just to throw something else in, the civil magistrate as a minister of God is under the rule of God and under God's law. And just like a minister in the church is, like a minister isn't a separate jurisdiction, the church as opposed to the state, but there's not separate rules, of ethical rules for the church and the state. It's not like, well, in the church, we believe in the traditional family and allowing babies to be born, but then in the secular area, there's a different set of rules. So we don't have to believe in traditional marriage and don't have to let babies be born. You know what I mean? Like, it's not, there's not separate rules for these different jurisdictions. God has established separate jurisdictions, but it's the same rules, the same ethics that rules both jurisdictions, both spheres.
Amen.
You stated that so well, Michael. I really appreciate it. I do want to ask you this. Why is it, though, it's always one-sided? Like, I never hear anyone ever say, hey, you keep your progressivism ideas out of it, or you keep your socialist ideas and thoughts out of this conversation. It's always, hey, you keep religion, you keep your Christianity out of it. It's always one-sided, but you're absolutely right. We look at it as religion, but really it's beliefs. It's what our thoughts and our belief system and how all that occurs. We don't ever see it that way against the progressive or the socialists or anything like that. It's always the Christian that keeps getting hammered. Why is that, and how do we change that?
Well, I think it's because, the secularists and progressives in particular dislike evangelical Christians more than other people. And to tie this in a bit more with the column, in the first part of the column, I refer to a column by Brian Lilly last year in the Toronto Sun, because he pointed out about a year ago, Pierre Poilievre visited some evangelical churches, and this created a big uproar among leftists in Ontario. They're saying, oh, he's mixing religion and politics because he went to evangelical churches, and this is a terrible thing. But they don't complain, like Brian Lilly pointed out, if Pierre Poilievre goes to a gurdwara or a mosque or a temple, these same people do not complain at all. They only complain if it goes to evangelical church. Like you say, it's a very one-sided thing. And even actually, I say conservative Christian because there have been many times in the last few decades in Canada where, say, a United Church minister will run for office and get elected. Like, a United Church minister is liberal Christian, right? And the same people that complain about evangelicals being involved in politics do not complain about United Church ministers getting elected as MPs or MLAs, or even in the case of Saskatchewan 20 years ago, they had a premier who had been, a United Church minister. Like, that was not a problem for them. It's only when it's evangelical Christians. And so, like, that's part of the purpose of my column was to bring that out, that there is this kind of contradiction. And it's because, conservative Christians, we have conservative viewpoints that are very much opposed to the progressive view, and the elite, like our political elite, our media elite, our educational elite, they have more left-wing views, and they do not like when we bring our views into politics, and our views are expressed and articulated in politics. They don't like that, and that's why they object to it. But they won't object if a United Church minister brings his views in, because his views reflect theirs, if you know what I mean. So you're very right. There is that double standard, and we're going to live with that double standard, I think, for a while, because they make a lot of mileage on it. When they complain about Christians being involved in politics, I hear from Christians who, are concerned about, the backlash they'll receive if they get involved in politics, right? And that's the purpose of that complaint of separation of church and state, because they want to intimidate Christians to stay out, because it benefits them politically when Christians do stay out. Their side wins when we don't participate, right? So it's beneficial for them to maintain that kind of illusion that there's something about the separation of church and state that should prohibit Christians from acting as citizens, the rightful, to exercise their rights as citizens.
And that's because of fear, right? I mean, the reason why Christians don't really, push it is because of fear.
Well, that's right. I mean, Christians are fearful that they're doing something wrong, right? It's like, a lot of Christians are very self-conscious about, like, they don't want to do things that are wrong. They don't want to offend people, right? I mean, most Christians don't want to offend other people. And if they think that they're going to be offending people by exercising their rights as citizens, they might just back off and say, well, I guess I don't want to do that because that's going to offend my neighbor. You know what I mean? So it is a fear. It's a fear of man in that sense, right? It's a fear of offending people or a fear of doing something wrong. But you're right. It is a fear. But that's why I'm trying to hope, or I'm hoping that through writing columns like I did, that Christians will come to a better understanding and realize they're not doing anything wrong and they have no reason to fear being involved.
Can I just, okay. Okay, I'm going to be calm here because I'm part of the problem too. I'm going to include myself in this group as part of the problem. Okay. The most offensive person that's ever walked on this planet was Jesus. I mean, like, go back and understand how they did things with the law. And here's some dude saying, I'm the Son of God. Here's some guy healing people on the Sabbath. Here's a man who's like challenging the narrative, of the biblical times. If you understand the context of what Jesus did, he was the most offensive man on the planet at that time. So for Christians to be worried that we don't want to offend people, where did that thought come from? Because that is not a God thought. It is not. You know what I mean? You can still love people and still give them truth. And those people can get offended. That's your prerogative. You shouldn't be, because I'm giving you truth. You know what I mean? Where did we get to be so weak? Because Jesus wasn't weak at all. Go back and understand the biblical times, the things he's saying, how offensive he was. He's casting out demons, and they're all like, it's gotta be Satan, Satan casting out, the demons in them. I mean, they were just so offended, which is why they had the conversations like, hey, we're gonna kill this guy. But Al and I've already said that's always been plan A of God's plan. God doesn't go, oh, no, they hate my son, so I got to work out plan B, to kill him. No, this is always plan A. It was always plan A. But Jesus did not shy back from sharing the truth. He did it in love. He was compassionate. I mean, this is the man we follow. This is the one we serve. And yet we're afraid, Christians are afraid to offend people. I don't get it. And I include myself as part of the problem. Alan?
Yeah.
You want me to say something after that? I'm just going to say amen, Corey.
We have to get over that. Right there, you just got to get over that. Put that in your thing of things you got to get over. You got to stop that. And you got to stop being embarrassed, because we've been saying this over and over again. Michael, I'm going to read it to you because I've been reading it the last couple of shows. Proverbs 30, verse 18, when people do not accept divine guidance, they run wild. Like, we want to bring Christ into the conversation. We want to bring universal law, natural law, biblical principles into the conversation, because if we put that inside our schools, our education, our law, our politics, our, e-commerce, our commerce, everything, people won't be running wild. Sin won't flourish. In fact, you'll be a nation that's blessed. You'll be a nation that's blessed. And to get that to connect with Christians, I just, hopefully we can continue to chip away at that block, because it's a problem.
It boils down to Christian schools. And when I was, looking at Christian schools, why do we set up Christian schools? Because we wanted to teach our children certain things about the Bible be the center textbook of every subject, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a deeper understanding of why we set up Christian schools. We set up Christian schools because we didn't want to try to force people who didn't believe in the Bible to have Bible pushed on them, right? In other words, they should be free to say, no, I don't want that education for my children. I want this kind of education. So we as Christians consider the other person by not saying, no, we're going to force you to worship God. We know we can't do that because it's a choice. But they don't feel that way. They feel we're going to force you to believe what we believe. And you don't like it? Tough. We're proud of what we believe and we're going to fly the flag. Okay? So it's like, to me, I don't know what happened, and in a lot of people's lives, but I've always, I believed in Christian radio stations. Why? Because those who want to listen to Christian music should have the opportunity to tune to a frequency and listen to Christian music. Well, guess what? The broadcasters have the same attitude. Those that want to listen to rock music can turn to this frequency and listen to rock music or country or whatever. So, we have to understand that in freedom, there's choice and people need to give choice. Well, now what do we got? We got political parties like the NDP in Canada who come in and they tried to destroy Christian schools. You guys are going to believe what we believe. So that means that if we're Christians, we would go into their schools and say, you got to believe what we believe. No, we don't do that. And we better not do that. That's not who a Christian is. A Christian is a person who respects somebody, what they believe, whether it's right or wrong, and you can go ahead and believe it. Here's what I believe. Here's what you believe. Bible says we love one another as Christ loved us, as God loved us. God so loved the world. That's the important issue, in my humble opinion. Michael.
No, I think that's such an important point, like especially with the schools. Like you said, we didn't try and force the schools to teach our beliefs to people. We set up alternative schools or homeschooling. It's like, you want your schools, you want your children taught a particular curriculum, you go do that with your children. You have the right. That's parental rights. And we have the right as parents to teach the children according to our beliefs. So we set up Christian schools and homeschooling. But like you say, like with the NDP, they wanted to force their beliefs. Like in Alberta under the NDP, if it wasn't for the UCP getting elected in 2019, there was a number of Christian schools who were under threat. They were going to lose their accreditation and funding because the NDP was trying to change their policies to force NDP beliefs, like in terms of some sexuality matters, onto those schools. But those schools have been set up to teach Christianity, not to teach the NDP beliefs. If those parents wanted their children learning the NDP ideology, they just would have sent them to public school. But they made these big sacrifices financially and in terms of time to set up schools, like you said. So we're not forcing it on anybody else. We're just doing these for ours, just for our children. So we're giving alternatives for people. And that's what's so important in education, is that parents have the right to choose what's best for their children, and they need these alternatives. But the other side doesn't like alternatives. They claim they're for diversity, but the diversity has to be within one closed system that embraces their ideology, which kind of exposes the hypocrisy of their use of the word diversity. And even like with the radio stations, as you mentioned, for generations, the government didn't allow Christian radio stations or TV stations. Like, it was just the one view. You had to accept just what they would offer. And like, you fought so hard, Alan, to create these opportunities so people could have an alternative, not so that everybody has to listen to Christian radio, but so that Christians had, an opportunity to listen to something different from everybody else. It was choice. Like you said, it was freedom and choice for all. Canadians benefited from this freedom and choice that Christians were fighting for in terms of choice in education and choice in radio, because you don't have to be a Christian to benefit from private school or home education, right? But it's a freedom that Christians fought for specifically. And so Christians are fighting for these freedoms, and other people benefit from these freedoms and from the Christian positions that we take in terms of education and radio and TV. And of course, this was politics, right? The fighting for Christian education, or the opportunity for Christian education, and fighting for opportunities for Christian stations and radio and TV. This is political activity. This is political activity that Christians engaged in to create these freedoms that benefit everybody.
Right. And we were willing to accept being treated as second-class citizens, meaning we were willing to not get full funding for our children to get educated, and somebody who's sending theirs to a public school would get full funded. And that's where money, the money, whatever costs to educate a child, should go with that child to make it really free for everybody to choose where they want their children and how they want their children educated. Sorry.
Well, we appreciate you, Michael. Thank you so much for being on the show. Keep writing, keep pushing forward, keep speaking truth, man. Do not stop. Do not back down. You are realizing your childhood dream. The Lord's finally making it happen. We're excited for you, and we're grateful that you're here on the show. Well, great conversation, Alan. I'm gonna give you the last word. What do we need to do? What do Christians need to do? How do we get better at this? Because we've just been, like you said, second-class citizens.
Well, first of all, we got to clean our act up personally with God. I mean, we just do. When we start hearing that, there's Christian men in our churches that are compromised in their life, and maybe even pastors compromised, we just, as people of God, we've got to get our act together. And that's, each of us have got to spend time with the Lord in prayer and get this thing going, because there's no use even trying to branch out and help others if we haven't got it, we don't have victory. And I go back to my verse that I said, at other shows, 1 Peter 1, verse 22, by obedience of the truth, having purified yourself. Okay, by obedience of the truth, having purified yourself. We purify ourselves and become pure by obeying the truth. And that is so key to what we need to be doing.
I can't believe we have to say that.
I know.
Purify yourself.
Yeah, purify yourself.
You want to help with our mission, keep this kind of conversation and truth on the air? We are viewer supported. We don't take government funds. Not going to happen. We're not going to do it. We're not going to compromise. It's only because of the generosity of viewers like you that we can continue to broadcast. You can go to our website, gotalktruth.com, click on donate. Many different ways you can give digitally. If you'd like to do it through the mail, you can make your gift payable to Heritage Christian Ministries Association and send it to 246 Stewart Green Southwest, Suite 3260, Calgary, Alberta, T3H3C8. And if you'd like prayer, maybe it has to do with purifying yourself, you can call our 800 number. It's toll free, 1-800-915-0056. Get prayer. It's important. All right, Dad, we're out of time. We'll see you guys later.
Love you.